For most of my life, I believed my family was my greatest blessing. I grew up in a modest home where my parents constantly reminded me that hard work was the key to success. My father worked long hours at a manufacturing plant while my mother managed the household. We never had much money, but we always had each other, or at least that's what I thought. As I got older, I became determined to build a better future. I worked through college, launched a small online business, and eventually turned it into a thriving company. Years of sleepless nights and sacrifices paid off. By the time I was 35, I had accumulated substantial savings and investments worth well over $1 million. I never forgot where I came from. I paid my parents' mortgage when my business took off. I covered medical bills whenever they needed help. On holidays and birthdays, I made sure they never wanted for anything. I genuinely believed that if I ever fell, my family would be there to catch me. I had no idea how wrong I was. Everything changed on a rainy November evening. I was driving home after meeting with a client when a truck lost control on a slippery highway. The impact was devastating. My car spun across multiple lanes before crashing into a concrete barrier. The next thing I remember is darkness. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. While I lay unconscious in a hospital bed, machines breathed and beeped around me. Doctors weren't sure if I would survive. Family members came and went. Nurses later told me my mother visited almost every day. She cried beside my bed and held my hand, telling everyone she refused to give up hope. To outsiders, she looked like the perfect mother. 6 months later, against all expectations, I woke up. The recovery was brutal. My muscles had weakened from months of inactivity. Walking felt impossible. Simple tasks exhausted me, yet despite the pain, I was grateful to be alive. My parents appeared overjoyed. My mother cried when she saw me awake. She hugged me carefully and told me it was a miracle. My father sat quietly beside my bed, tears in his eyes. Their reaction seemed genuine, and for a while, I felt lucky to have them. But as the weeks passed, strange things started happening. When I asked about my finances, my mother quickly changed the subject. When I requested access to my banking apps, she claimed she couldn't find my login information. When I mentioned reviewing my investment accounts, she insisted I should focus on healing instead. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, I had just survived a near-fatal accident. Then, one afternoon, after finally returning home, I opened a stack of unopened mail that had accumulated during my hospitalization. Most of it was ordinary, but one envelope caught my attention. It was a statement from one of my investment accounts. The balance looked wrong, very wrong. My heart began pounding. I logged into the account online and stared at the screen. The numbers didn't make sense. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were missing. My hands trembled as I checked another account. Then another and another. Each one told the same horrifying story: large withdrawals, wire transfers, liquidated investments, money disappearing in chunks over several months. The total loss was staggering. $750,000. I felt sick. There had to be some mistake. Maybe the accounts had been moved. Maybe there was an accounting error. Maybe someone had hacked me. Desperate for answers, I called my financial advisor. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Those transactions were authorized while you were in the hospital. We received signed documents approving every transfer. Signed documents. While I was in a coma." I slowly lowered the phone and stared at the wall. Someone had accessed my accounts. Someone had signed my name. Someone I trusted enough to have access during an emergency. And in that terrifying moment, I realized the accident hadn't been the worst thing that happened to me. The real nightmare was only beginning. I barely slept after discovering that $750 zero had vanished from my accounts. Every time I closed my eyes, the same question haunted me. Who could have done this? The next morning, I contacted my financial advisor again and demanded copies of every document related to the withdrawals. Within hours, my inbox was filled with files. As I opened the first document, my stomach twisted. There was my signature, or at least something that looked like it. The signature was shaky and uneven, but close enough to pass a quick inspection. Yet I knew immediately that it wasn't mine. I had signed thousands of documents throughout my career. I knew every curve and stroke of my signature better than anyone. Someone had forged it, and they had done it repeatedly. I spent the next several days reviewing every transfer. The money had been withdrawn gradually during the 6 months I was unconscious. Whoever did this had been careful. They didn't take everything at once. Instead, they moved funds through multiple accounts, hoping the activity wouldn't raise suspicion. Unfortunately for them, I was no longer asleep. I hired a lawyer and a private forensic accountant. When they began tracing the money trail, the truth emerged faster than I expected. The transfers all led to one person. My mother, at first, I refused to believe it. There had to be another explanation. Maybe someone had tricked her. Maybe she had been manipulated. Maybe her account was merely used as a temporary destination. But every new piece of evidence destroyed another excuse. The money wasn't accidentally deposited into her accounts. She had spent it. Large purchases appeared everywhere. A luxury SUV, expensive jewelry, designer handbags, a complete renovation of her house, lavish vacations. Money that had taken me years to earn had disappeared in a matter of months. The most painful discovery wasn't the spending. It was the planning. According to bank records, my mother had met with lawyers, bankers, and financial representatives multiple times while I was unconscious. She had presented forged authorization forms and claimed she was acting on my behalf. This wasn't a moment of desperation. It was a calculated scheme. When my lawyer finally confirmed everything, I felt physically ill. The woman who had kissed my forehead before school. The woman who told me she loved me. The woman who sat beside my hospital bed pretending to pray for my recovery. She had been stealing from me the entire time. A week later, I confronted her. I drove to my parents' house carrying copies of the evidence. My hands shook as I walked through the front door. My mother greeted me with a smile. "Sweetheart, what a surprise." I threw the documents onto the kitchen table. Her smile vanished instantly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she slowly sat down. "Where did you get these?" she asked quietly. I stared at her in disbelief. Not once did she deny it. Not once did she ask what I was talking about. Instead, she wanted to know how I found out. "Tell me I'm wrong." I said, "Silence. Tell me you didn't forge my signature." Still silence. Finally, she sighed. "I didn't think you'd ever notice." The words hit me harder than the accident that nearly killed me. I felt my chest tighten. "You stole $750,000 from me. I raised you." She snapped suddenly. "Do you have any idea how much I sacrificed for you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You stole my money while I was in a coma." Her eyes narrowed. "It wasn't stealing. I deserved it. Deserved it." That single word shattered whatever remained of our relationship. She went on for nearly 20 minutes, listing every sacrifice she had ever made as a mother, feeding me, clothing me, driving me to school, as if raising her child entitled her to rob him, as if motherhood was a business investment that demanded repayment. When she finally stopped talking, I looked at her and realized I no longer recognized the woman sitting across from me. The mother I loved existed only in my memories. The person in front of me was a stranger. Without another word, I stood up. As I reached the door, she called after me, "You wouldn't have survived without this family." I turned around one last time. "No," I said quietly, "I survived despite it." Then I walked away. That evening, my lawyer officially filed the fraud and forgery lawsuit. For the first time since waking from my coma, I wasn't grieving the money. I was grieving the mother I thought I had. And deep down, I knew the worst part of this betrayal was still waiting to reveal itself. 3 months passed after I filed the lawsuit against my mother. For the first time since the accident, my life was beginning to feel normal again. Physical therapy was helping. I had returned to work part-time and slowly regained control of my company. The legal case was moving forward, and investigators continued gathering evidence against my mother. The emotional wounds, however, healed much slower. Some nights I still woke up angry. Other nights I woke up heartbroken. The money mattered, of course, but what hurt most was the betrayal. Every childhood memory felt contaminated. Every family photo reminded me of the lie I had been living. I had blocked my mother's phone number and ignored every attempt she made to contact me. Then, one evening, everything changed. I was finishing dinner when my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it. For some reason, I answered. The voice on the other end made my stomach tighten instantly. It was my aunt, my mother's older sister. She sounded nervous. "Please don't hang up," she said. "What do you want?" There was a brief silence. "It's about your father." The mention of him immediately caught my attention. Unlike my mother, my father had never been manipulative. He had remained mostly silent throughout the entire scandal. In many ways, his silence disappointed me, but I still cared about him. "What happened?" I asked. My aunt took a deep breath. "His kidneys are failing." I froze. "What?" "The doctors say he needs a transplant." For a moment, all my anger disappeared. Despite everything, he was still my father, the man who taught me how to ride a bicycle, the man who attended my graduation, the man who worked overtime for years to support our family. The news hit me hard. When did this happen? A few weeks ago. I sat down slowly. "Is he going to be okay? The doctors are hopeful, but treatment is expensive." I knew exactly where the conversation was heading. And I wasn't wrong. The next day, my mother appeared at my front door. The audacity left me speechless. She stood there as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't stolen $750,000, as if she wasn't being sued for fraud, as if she hadn't destroyed our family. When I opened the door, she immediately started crying. At first, I thought she might finally apologize. "I was wrong. Your father needs you," she said. "Not 'I'm sorry.' Not 'I made a terrible mistake.' Just another demand." I crossed my arms. "What do you want?" "The surgery, medications, hospital costs, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars." I stared at her. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. "You stole $750,000 from me." She wiped away her tears. "This isn't about me." "No," I replied, "it's exactly about you." Her expression hardened. "He's your father, and I'm your son." The words hung in the air. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she pointed a finger at me. "If you don't help him, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The manipulation was so familiar. Suddenly, memories flooded back. Every guilt trip, every emotional threat, every time I was told that my feelings mattered less than the family's needs. Growing up, I had always been the responsible one, the fixer, the provider, the person expected to sacrifice everything while everyone else took. The accident had nearly killed me. The theft had shattered my trust, and somehow they still expected me to rescue them. My mother stepped closer. Family takes care of family. I looked directly into her eyes. Is that what you told yourself while stealing from your son? She had no answer. For the first time, I saw panic flicker across her face. The lawsuit had drained much of the money she had taken. Her expensive purchases were being investigated. Assets were at risk of being frozen. She wasn't asking because she cared about my father. She was asking because she had run out of options. That realization changed everything. I loved my father, but I no longer trusted my mother, and I certainly wasn't going to hand her another dollar. As she stood on my doorstep waiting for an answer, a decision formed in my mind. I would make sure my father got the treatment he needed, but I would do it my way, not hers, not through her. Not with a blank check she could exploit. My mother believed she could steal from me, manipulate me, and then guilt me into saving her from the consequences. She was about to learn a painful lesson. The days of controlling my life were over, and for the first time since waking from my coma, I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about justice. The morning after my mother appeared at my doorstep, I made several phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, the second was to my father's medical team, and the third was to a transplant specialist. If my father truly needed help, I wanted facts, not stories filtered through my mother's manipulation. Within a week, I had my answers. The diagnosis was real. My father's kidneys were failing rapidly, and without a transplant, his future was uncertain. Hearing the news hurt more than I expected. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want him to suffer. What surprised me most was learning that he had no idea where much of the stolen money had gone. According to relatives and financial records, my mother had controlled nearly every financial decision in the household. My father knew she had been spending heavily, but he believed she was using savings and retirement funds. He never imagined she had forged my signature while I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. That didn't completely excuse his silence, but it changed how I viewed him. For the first time in months, I agreed to meet him alone. When he walked into the coffee shop, he looked older than I remembered. Sicker, smaller. The strong man from my childhood seemed to have disappeared. We sat in silence for several moments. Then he spoke. I failed you. The words caught me off guard. His eyes filled with tears. I should have protected you. Years of anger suddenly felt heavier. He explained that after my accident, he trusted my mother to handle everything. Whenever he asked questions, she assured him she was managing my affairs legally. When he eventually learned the truth, the lawsuit had already begun. I was ashamed. He admitted. I believed him. Not because I wanted to, because I could see the regret written across his face. For over an hour, we talked honestly for the first time in years. When we finished, I made him a promise. I'll help with your treatment. His shoulders shook as he quietly cried. But there was one condition. My mother would never touch a single dollar. Every payment would go directly to the hospital, surgeons, and medical providers. No exceptions, no negotiations. When my mother learned about the arrangement, she exploded. She called repeatedly. She sent angry messages. She accused me of trying to humiliate her. The irony was unbelievable. She had stolen 3/4 of $1 million from me and somehow viewed herself as the victim. I ignored every complaint. Meanwhile, the legal case continued moving forward. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Handwriting experts confirmed the signatures were forged. Bank records traced the stolen funds directly to her accounts. Witnesses testified about meetings she attended while pretending to represent me. Eventually, the court ruled in my favor. Assets purchased with stolen money were seized, luxury vehicles were sold, investment accounts were frozen. Property connected to the fraud became subject to recovery proceedings. Piece by piece, much of the stolen money was returned. The financial victory felt satisfying, but the emotional victory felt even greater. For years, my mother had controlled people through guilt. She manipulated relatives, friends, and family members into believing whatever story benefited her. Now the truth was public. Everyone knew what she had done. No excuses, no lies, no hiding. The reputation she spent decades building collapsed under the weight of her own actions. Months later, my father successfully received his transplant. The surgery went well. His recovery wasn't easy, but it was successful. One afternoon, after a follow-up appointment, we sat together outside the hospital. The sun was setting. For the first time in a long while, neither of us felt burdened by secrets. You know, he said quietly, I always thought revenge meant hurting someone back. I smiled. So did I. He nodded toward the hospital behind us, but you didn't do that. I looked at the building where his life had been saved. My mother expected me to become bitter. She expected me to abandon my father. She expected me to act exactly the way she would have acted. Instead, I chose something she never understood: accountability, justice, and compassion. The court punished her crimes. The truth destroyed her lies, and my father received the treatment he needed. In the end, I recovered far more than $750,000. I recovered my self-respect. I recovered my freedom from manipulation, and I learned that the sweetest revenge isn't destroying the people who betray you. It's proving that their betrayal could never destroy who you are. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I finally felt something I hadn't felt since before the accident. Peace, real, lasting peace. And for the first time in a very long time, the future looked brighter than the past.